What's the story about the 30th birthday?
I remember because that was in the window of the 2 to 3 years to live. I think I was diagnosed at 28 and I was told I would have 2 to 3 years to live. And so they had a surprise party for me, which was like, I'm talking about my babysitter I had when I was in kindergarten was there. And like every person who knew me seemed to show up and was invited because they were like, he's probably going to be dead by 31, so you might want to come see him now, was sort of the way it was presented to people. And so people came.
Amazing. The gifts were staggering. Oh my God.
Yeah, people, it was like really beautiful who came and everything. I realized when I walked in the room, instead of everyone going, surprise, and being like, yay, everyone was crying. Because what I didn't know is my mom had a fight with my partner at the time, Eddie. And right before everyone walked in, and she had brought, she had brought her tuna salad that I love. And Eddie had done a Chinese, which is my favorite kind of food, a Chinese like buffet. So he's trying to tell my mom, look, I know Joel loves it, but tomorrow we can serve it at brunch. It doesn't really go with Chinese food. And they're screaming at each other. And my mom yells, he's going to be dead by his 35th birthday. I want him to have my chicken salad at this birthday.
It was always drama.
That happened. And then when I walked in minutes later, everyone was like, surprise. Oh my God. He's not on here.
Hey, what's up, friends? Welcome to Leaders, Letters, and Legacy, the podcast where the past, present, principle, and purpose all relentlessly collide and inspire. We are thrilled that you are here as we explore the life lessons and the leadership moments that continue to shape the fraternity and sorority experience. Along with my dear friend, Dr. Mary Ann Colley, I'm Scott Fussell, and it is a good day, a really, really good day to tell a great story. Let's go. Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with TJ and Joel, and a look back at their legendary program, Friendship in the Age of AIDS. We pick up right where we left off.
Yeah.
And the interesting piece about it was that watching you guys do the program, you could tell there was this great love between you. And you also still at that point didn't know if your friend was going to live. The ability for you to be able to tell a really heart-wrenching story, right? And then to create an environment where people are laughing their asses off, because some people would probably sit there and be like, okay, his friend is really sick, but he is really funny. And this is really different, And so I think it was one of the most unique experiences as an audience member, being able to watch this dynamic, and yet it had all the emotions to it. It was, You were laughing because you were crying because you were laughing. Then you were crying because you cared about these two friends. We felt like we knew you. And this is before I knew you.
Yeah.
Audiences felt like they knew you because it was so just real. It was,
Authentic.
It could have been any of us, right? Could have been any of us, but it was beautifully done. And I don't think we told you that probably during that period of time because, one, we didn't ever think that Friendship in the Age of AIDS would end. I remember, and this was before social media, that moment people were like losing their shit, being like, wait, what do you mean they're done? So there was a lot going on, but I think the way you created that delivery was brilliant.
And to be clear, the affection was entirely platonic. Joel and I are not each other's type. Just like, I think people for 35 years have wondered if Joel and I were sexually involved. We never got anywhere in the neighborhood of that. Like,
No.
Nasty. That's just nasty. Joel and I would no. That's just disgusting. Oh, there's gross stories we don't
I
want
walk
to get
around
into.
nude. I don't care. I come from that open family who discussed, sex when I was 6th grade.
Joel has no modesty, and I am like a completely repressed mess. So it was,
I know. If we ever needed some time alone in the room, we would just go. TJ, I need to make a personal phone call. I need to go to the lobby.
Joel. And I'd go to the lobby. I'd go to the lobby and, like, work on my outline, try to perfect my jokes while Joel's.
My gosh.
So yeah, it was.
Well, there it is.
There it is. There it is.
So this is one of the things that I love about the software that we use is it pulls out 60-second clips that have to be shared. And that is one I'm certain that AI is going to say, oh, there's something we got to share right there. And we'll be right back. Scott Fusel's approach to mental health and well-being programming is, shall we say, it's just different. If you're looking for content heavy on the clinical side, Scott's probably not a fit for your organization. However, if you're seeking a refreshingly transparent, application-rich, and shame-free message that places a higher premium on connection than correction, you can now say, I know a guy. And his story sounds really familiar. After the show, head over to scottfuselcoaching.com and check out the many ways Scott can empower you, your family, your community, or your organization with the tools needed to experience true transformation. Scott Fusel Coaching and Consulting, well-being and parenting programming that meets you right where you are. Now back to the show. Hey, Matt, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Talk about being a professional on a campus.
Yeah.
What was it like to bring TJ and Joel to campus? What were your students' reaction?
Yeah, well, and in that period of time, campuses really didn't know, especially in the fraternity and sorority space, that they needed resources to be able to pay professionals to come to campus. And it was a tricky time, right? So I went back to campus after hearing them speak, and I think it might have taken me a year, but we wanted to do a week-long AIDS education experience. And so wanted to talk to the populations that we felt needed to be heard and seen, needed to talk about, could we do this? And how would it be received? Because the community was going to have an opinion, because this is a small college town. We wanted to be on the radio. But the other piece of it was the AIDS quilt had just traveled to Washington, D.C. And seeing those clips on TV, having been able to be, watch Joel and TJ on this journey, and they'll tell you the events that followed up. It was so impactful. So I didn't know if we could get part of the quilt brought to Southeastern to be in the room when Joel and TJ came to speak. And what I learned very quickly was it was an intricate process, that when you brought pieces of the quilt anywhere, you were bringing the representation of every panel was the size of a grave, right? And
Yep.
so you had to be respectful that represented the individual's quilts. So I had to work intimately with the AIDS quilt folks, because they had to bring it into a room. It had to be set up properly. And then I asked them, I said, can our speakers, TJ Sullivan and Joel Goldman, can they speak in the room where the quilt is housed? And they had some moments of thought. I don't know if y'all were the first ones, like, outside of that environment to do that or whatever, but they had very clear instructions on the quilt couldn't be left alone. So students signed up for times to sit in the ballroom at Southeastern Louisiana University with the quilt. The other part was, in order to not have the quilt be in any way disrespected, we had them bring blankets and sit on the floor, so they weren't in chairs. And that's the setup for how our AIDS Awareness Week, we had students, we had the African American community represented at that point, so that would be respectful of how they needed that message to be received. Fraternity members, residential life, sorority members, but it was all built around, leading up to TJ and Joel were going to be speaking in the room where the AIDS quilt was actually there. And the other beautiful part that happened was we had 2 panels made with Southeastern's logo on it, that everyone who attended the viewing, because you could come see the quilt outside of their speaking, they would sign that quilt. We kept one at Southeastern that's still framed, and we sent one on with the quilt that then became a part of their story. So that sets up that.
It was the first time. It was the first time others followed that, but man, I think that was the very first time that I ever spoke with the quilt right there behind me, and it was so powerful, and it was harder to even speak because here's all these people that are have already passed, and yet I'm still here, and a little bit of survivor's guilt maybe at that point because the meds were changing, and look, I'm still here today because of changing meds. But even back then, I remember meeting a house mother. I think it was a house mother at when we were at Inter IFI that summer we met you. That house mother's son had just passed away a year before, and he didn't have the chance to get on the meds that I had the chance to get on the meds. And I'm still in touch with her because it's like it was. So there's a little bit of survivor's guilt that I was alive long enough and I had access to meds that some people did not have access to because of family connections and things like that. So to speak in front of that was so powerful and moving. I think a lot of people followed your lead after that. Like other campuses started to bring it. So
Well, I always say that Joel and I were sort of like the third generation AIDS warriors. The first ones were the ones who were dying, going to funerals every week of their friends and who were screaming in the streets about meds. And, those people are my heroes. I can watch documentaries about the very first days of AIDS and I just well up in tears because that wasn't where I came into the story, and I just have nothing but reverence and admiration for the people who just dealt with their friend groups just dying all around them. And then the second generation was kind of like all the medical people, right? The people who were fighting for drug testing and all, I mean, like there's stories of doctors and nurses and people who did miraculous things to try to help people who were infected. That was the second generation. And then I think Joel and I were part of this third generation that were like, okay, let's take it out to the masses, right? And that's what we were doing. But while we were doing that, the fight was still going on in the background, and having the AIDS quilt behind us was such a memory of the fact that, my God, here we were making jokes about dental dams and whatever, but real people had died. This had decimated the gay community, especially, and and especially in big urban centers, New York and San Francisco. But we had to remember, here we were talking in Kearney, Nebraska, trying to get people to actually care about this.
Mhm.
And so we had our place in the overall fight, but it was definitely, I frequently felt like, I needed to be out screaming in the streets too, but that wasn't our role. Our role was to make 1.5 million students know what the hell a dental dam was, or to negotiate with, their boyfriend, when things were getting in gear, to get their asses up and walk across the room and get that condom, and
Yeah.
that's what our role was. And so I feel really good about that. But I have to say, in the moment, I sometimes felt like we had the easy lift. It felt sometimes. I don't know, Joel, if you felt that way.
No, I felt exactly the same way. Like we were just out there educating. We weren't out there fighting for the drugs or fighting for the,
But you were saving lives with your stories.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever reconciled that, because I know as humans, we are like, yeah, I'm just a part of the blah, blah, blah. But you saved lives because you educated people who would have never educated themselves.
Yeah.
Period.
And there are great stories like you can share about University of South Florida in Tampa.
Yeah.
We went there one year. The first year we went there, it was for a Greek thing, and there were maybe 20 people in the room. And at the end of at the end of that program, someone came up to me with a Sigma Chi pledge at the time, and he said, "I've had HIV for X amount of years, and I'm pledging Sigma Chi, and I've never told my brothers, and hearing you makes me feel like if I'm gonna be accepted here, I need to share it." And I said there's pros and cons, and we kept in touch, and he did share it, and the Sigma Chi chapter there was incredibly supportive of him, and even to the point where it didn't just stay within their walls. They shared, with his permission, his story was shared elsewhere. And the one thing, his name was Jared, the one thing that Jared said to me is like, I just wish more people on in the Greek community on the campus here would have been here tonight. There were like 20 people. And that was his big sadness about our program, is that, mostly sorority women, I think, and a couple guys and him. And so the next year we were brought back to University of South Florida, and we found out right before, I think it was
the day of,
it was that Jared had actually passed away a few days earlier, and Sigma Chi wanted to do their White Rose ceremony, I think it's called, the ceremony for when someone passes, and they
right before we spoke on the stage.
Right before we spoke, and that ballroom was like, it was a big convocation center. It was packed with thousands of people.
At least 1,500 people there for that, and
dry
eye in the room.
And his, but his kind of like, we fulfilled what he wanted, more of his friends to hear it. And it was really, he fulfilled it by passing and being open about it. Don't usually get this emotional when I talk about that, but I think that was one of the most poignant things when you say, did you save lives? We know that students that night were listening because they just witnessed Jared pass away.
And I remember a young woman telling us that she had not spoken to her father, who was positive, in years. And after hearing our program, she called him.
Wow.
And so we, I have to say, this is just a good place for me to say, like, there's always this debate, like, do speakers make a difference? Do speakers make a difference? Oh, speakers come in, they don't change anything. It's just a feel good thing. Speakers don't make a difference. I know that's crap, because I know that we change lives, and maybe ours was special. I don't know. Maybe every program doesn't move the needle, but my God, I know that we moved the needle on this, and it was hugely rewarding, but also devastating, because we were reminded on a daily basis that this was a public health crisis, and we were up there making jokes and doing different things, but God, there were a lot. This was a huge deal. I mean, we never doubted that we were doing something important. I think we sometimes just weren't sure where it was going.
Well, you can be relevant or you can be rigid. And I love that you guys chose to be relevant versus succumbing to the rigidity that others thought that you should be presenting with.
The other part of this that I hope our listeners, whatever age and stage that they're at, can really understand was this was before the age of social media and technology. Like,
even email didn't exist.
That's right. TJ and Joel were able to create a movement on college campuses before there was the reach that we have today. And I think, in order for us to kind of really look at the impact that they had, you have to put it into perspective that this happened in real time, in real spaces where people were present. It wasn't virtual. It wasn't TikTok. It wasn't, and they created.
You weren't fighting a ballroom full of people that are,
but they were creating a movement with people who would have never even been aware if it didn't show up on a television or in a newspaper. So I want to make sure that our listeners put that into context, because it's easy in 2025 to say, I'm going to start something and this is how I'm going to launch and deliver. These two men, you two, did it. Today, people would study this process and how you did it.
Yeah. And we'll be right back. Dr. Marianne Kale is a nationally recognized facilitator and leader in building belonging and organizational culture. With over 25 years of experience in higher ed and strategic initiatives, Marianne empowers teams and communities to feel seen, valued, and connected. Her work blends story, research, music, and heart to bring people together around purpose and identity. To learn more about how Dr. Kale can help your organization or community build belonging and connection, strengthening and cultivating a values-based culture, go to maryannkale.com. Now back to the show. One of the things that I think people would study, to stay with that analogy, Mac, is I think they would study the pace of play here. The fact that you had 20 young people show up to your program one year, and then the next year, thousands, spoke to the pace with which you were reaching people and the pace with which Jared's story was reaching people locally. So I think what I'd love for you to maybe expand on is when you think back to that 8-year window, how much did things change uh, with uh, with awareness, with medication, with people having an open ear and open heart to hear and accept either a friend's or loved one's diagnosis, or maybe just somebody coming to share information. Talk about how much things changed culturally and medicinally during that 8 years.
I want Joel to definitely talk about how it changed for him, because I think he was living the change, right? But
Yeah.
I feel like it's so important to mention that we weren't operating in a vacuum. This was during the time Pedro Zamora was on The Real World on MTV. And my God,
Yeah.
his
Oh my
cultural
goodness.
impact was huge. And so we were not the only thing. It wasn't like we just came in and like no one had heard of this. Between Magic Johnson and Pedro Zamora and just all, there, Rock Hudson, for God's sake,
Yeah.
it was in the culture and it was right there. And people were cluing into the urgency as we were out there filling 5,000 seats a week. So Joel and I were somehow surfing this wave, and the timing was perfect, and our friends made it happen, and just all this sort of stuff. But Joel, talk about like the difference between 1993 and 1999.
Yeah. Yeah. When we started, I think I was saying in the program that I had 2 or 3 years to live. And by the time it ended, the antiretrovirals had been discovered and I was on them, and I was talking about, living a long, healthy, normal life, just had to take my medicines all the time. And even back then, I remember TJ used to take at one point I took like 36 pills a day, and some had to be refrigerated. And it was a pain. When we traveled, it was like I had to have a little ice thing for my refrigerated pills, and we had to find a place to refrigerate them. And
We were a traveling pharmacy
I
for the
know.
first couple of years.
I bet
Yeah,
you
and
were.
so, but that's what it took. And now, now here I am. I guess it's more than 30 years. I was diagnosed in 92, so I think we're talking 33, 34, 35 years. Now all I do is I get 2 shots every other month, one in each hip, and that's it. I don't take any other meds. I take
What?
2 shots. Cabenuva it's called, and it's changed my life in a way that I'm not living by the pills anymore. Those 2 shots are amazing. And they're talking about that they're going to get them down to 1 shot and then make it even 1 shot a year. And my immune system's better now on Cabenuva than it was on any of the pills. So
I
what's
think the
great about
surfing metaphor is actually very apt, because it's almost like we were on this huge wave way out in the ocean. And then as we got closer to the, 1999, we were riding a smaller wave, right? When we first went, it would be like we were the first time anybody had had anything about HIV or AIDS on their campus. By 99, we would have the student HIV peer educators having a booth outside, and so it just, in that 8 years, just the cultural awareness and the college health environment and just everything. By that point we were riding because people loved the show, right? But the urgency wasn't there, and that's why in 99, I said to Joel, you're going to live a life now, and I think I need to live one too. I think I need to do something different. And so I'm the one that killed the program in 99.
Yeah, not the other way around.
Yeah,
People used to think, oh, Joel's health, he's tired. And it was
we thought we would end because Joel's health would give out, and it ended up being me that said, I want to have a family, I want to buy a house, I want to start a business, I want to do some other things, so yeah, the 90s AIDS was the big explosive issue, and we were just the guys at the right time, I guess. So,
and what I find amazing, I still have it. It's a big crate of letters, handwritten letters from people who heard us speak. First of all, people don't write letters anymore, but if it had been emails back then, I think that big crate would have been times 100 in terms of who we heard from. And I can pull out any letter in that crate, and usually it's talking about how we changed someone's life or made their life easier.
We did get a little bit of hate mail too, a little bit.
I'm sure you did.
A little bit. And it was mostly like people sending us scripture and things and telling us that, we had some of that.
But I have a friend, her name's Amy Weinblum. She spent 11 years when Oprah transitioned from the big TV thing to going into her next wave. My friend was Amy was her chief of staff. We've been friends for even longer than before she was working with Oprah. And she was moving because she was having kids and she was trying to clear out a room for the baby. And she started to find her college stuff. And she said she cut out one article during her 4 years at Penn State. And the article was of us speaking, and she saved it because it meant something to her. And she said it's the only article she saved over a 4-year period. And when she told me that, she called me one night. I just couldn't believe it. And I sent it to TJ and said, look, we had an impact that we didn't even know we had for her to save that one article about us.
Well, Joel, let me stay right there for a second. I watched you get really emotional talking about Jared, and to hear you describe Amy's story there. What were the key messages, or maybe how you delivered it, that were really impacting students, where my understanding is that you would get one set of questions and TJ would get like a completely different group coming up talking to him. So talk about
the bitterness.
Talk about that. Talk about the difference and how that impacted you. And maybe TJ, maybe you talk about how it impacted you as well.
Before they do that, let me tell you, after, even throughout the program, through those 8 years and even after, people would say, hey, how's Joel? I'm like, God, he's doing so much better. The meds are working, blah, blah. And then they would be like, that dude, TJ, chicken burrito. And that would be the analogy that they would give. It would be like, how's Joel? Oh, that dude, chicken burrito. He can tell you what that means. But I mean, chicken burrito lived on for years.
It still does. I run into people who saw us who like 30 years now, and they're like, they remember that part of
I'll tell about it. But Joel, tell them the kind of things people would say to you after the program.
Yes.
Like I was getting serious, like questions, like women who are like, well, my boyfriend, I remember specifically on a Catholic campus, this woman came up and she was like, my boyfriend says if we do it anally, I'm not at risk and I'll still be a virgin. And, and I would get those serious types of like.
And the dead relatives, you got all the dead uncles and the dead cousins. And he was every night was awake after the program.
I would go, I have 13 cousins and 2 uncles.
And then I would have
like every night. And
then I'd have the hot fraternity president come up to me and go, look at my penis. Do you think this is too big for a condom? And I was like, wow, no, I think you can do it. So we'd drive away and I'd be like, oh my God, like 6 hot fraternity guys came up and asked about their sex lives. And Joe would be like, I got 4 dead uncles and a, infected aunt. And I'm like,
that's great.
Man. So I definitely got the good side of that part of the program. I got all the hot dudes that wanted to talk to me about how they had sex. So that kept me going for probably years 6 through 8.
Yeah. I don't know. I say I need a private phone call now after this.
And we'll be right back. Scott Fusel's approach to mental health and well-being programming is, shall we say, it's just different. If you're looking for content heavy on the clinical side, Scott's probably not a fit for your organization. However, if you're seeking a refreshingly transparent, application-rich, and shame-free message that places a higher premium on connection than correction, you can now say, I know a guy, and his story sounds really familiar. After the show, head over to scottfuselcoaching.com and check out the many ways Scott can empower you, your family, your community, or your organization with the tools needed to experience true transformation. Scott Fusel Coaching and Consulting, well-being and parenting programming that meets you right where you are. Now back to the show.
I'm afraid.
Okay, so TJ, what were the pieces that you would share in your segment? Because it sounds like Joel would come on, tell his story, then you would come on and bring some kind of light and humor to it, and then you'd come on together. What were some of the things that young men, especially, it sounds like more the straight guys are probably coming to you to say,
Sadly, the gay ones never came to me.
Sorry.
The gay ones came to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So my part of the program, Joel's was his story, right? His was very much the personal testimonial. Then I had 3 things I had to do. So I had to talk about the actual virus, how it was transmitted. So I gave sort of the, like, how does this happen? Like, the not super medical, but like, body fluids and all the different, I would do that part. Then I would talk about the prevention, like all the things people could do to be safer. And then I also talked about the alcohol part. So I would talk, and that's where the chicken burrito thing came in. I made this analogy one night, God knows where it came from, but I said, you know how like at 2 a.m. when you're starving and you come out of the bars or the party and the only thing you can think about is a chicken burrito, like you want that more than you want to take your next breath. And you will walk through a drive-through because you just want that damn burrito so bad. And I'd be like, nothing else matters. And I'd put my hands up, on the side of my eyes, and I'd be like, it's like blinders, like chicken burrito, chicken burrito, chicken burrito. That's all you can focus on is chicken burrito. And I said, sex is like that. When you're horned up and you're drunk and you want to have sex becomes your chicken burrito. And that always got a huge laugh, and it was a big thing. I remember us walking down the Magnificent Mile in Chicago, I swear to God, and across 8 lanes of traffic, someone from the other side screamed, "Hey, chicken burrito!" from across the Magnificent Mile on I was like, Joel, we're the most famous, non-famous people in the world because people are screaming at us across 8 lanes of downtown Chicago traffic, a line from our program. So,
and we never get sponsored by Taco Bell, but you could.
You should have been sponsored by Taco Bell.
I know. We never did.
Today you would have an NIL contract with Taco Bell.
Back then, we didn't know we could have had a contract.
Well, I mean, after your sessions, hashtag chicken burrito would have been trending. No question whatsoever.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yep. My goodness.
Coming to my office, like, and it'd be like chicken burrito, and they just bust out laughing. It was just.
And we also showed a video that Joel shot. Joel did such a great job. He went and talked to these students during the daytime and said, and they would say really responsible things. And then Joel went out, like, and this was at Ohio State, right, Joel?
I did Ohio State. I did a couple in New York.
Yes.
So you would do these on the campus where you were speaking?
No. Joel, this was a summer project, and he went out and he, like, at parties, and these dudes and the women would be wasted, and they would say the stupidest things. And so we combined that into a video, and that was a transition between Joel's very heavy personal story. We'd play the video of students saying all this dumb stuff, and then I would come out and do the funny stuff. So, like, it was all very, it was very deliberate, the transitions. But no, that was a big thing. I don't know where I was going with that, but that, we let the students talk for themselves. We weren't being like, oh, you're a bad person if you think this. So we were not being scoldy. We were being like, hey, what do you think? And everybody would say, oh my God, I know that guy. Like, these are people I see
or I am that guy.
Or I am that guy. Yeah. So that was a major part of the success of the program.
And there was one time where we were on a campus, and that guy who was really drunk in our video was in the audience.
No.
And he didn't realize that, he'd gone on a road trip to Ohio State or something, and he didn't know he had signed a release, but he didn't realize what it was really being used for. And he was like, it was a cathartic moment for him. He kept in touch after that about, like, how he wanted to change his image and things like that. So
wow.
Yeah, but it was pretty funny.
TJ,
Scott, I forgot your original question. What the hell was your original question?
I don't even remember now. I have no idea. I have no idea what I asked.
You answered it.
No, I think we did. He was asking about what's changed from the beginning of the 8 years to the end.
Yeah. And some of those key messages that were landing. Joel, for you, gosh, I hate that you got the dead uncle conversations.
Oh, I thought it was hilarious.
By the way, I would just want to be very clear to our listeners. That's a TJ term. That is not a Scott term. Obviously, your story in and of itself is compelling enough to get those. But I still think back then there was still so much fear, and maybe some, like, if you've got a family member, either fear or maybe even embarrassment or some shame involved in that.
Stigma.
Oh, for
so
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about this for 2 reasons, because Mac, you talked about the AIDS quilt there had to be somebody with it all the time, and I'm thinking, well, that had to be as much for security reasons as it was respecting that quilt.
Yep.
And so, Joel, what do you think it was about how and what you shared that made young people say, "Oh man, I've never told anybody about this, but maybe this is the time I need to share it."
I think whenever you're a speaker who has a personal story to share, and I've talked about this with other people like Rob Zabo, who does mental health, as you might know, and whenever you share your personal story, it's almost like an invitation for everybody who just heard you in the audience to come up and share their personal story, because they don't feel comfortable all the time sharing those stories with the people in their lives. Now, we hope that after hearing our program, more and more people do. And we've heard in some of those letters talk about, like, I talked to you after the program and I took your advice and I shared with my sorority, and, how it's helped them. But I think anytime you're a speaker with any kind of personal issue and you open up, you've opened the door for anyone to come up to you and share theirs. And I used to watch TJ, because he get his 4 or 5 hot fraternity guys, and then I'd have a line of like 20 people, and TJ is like ready. When he's done, he is done. He wants to get back in the room. He wants to go to dinner, whatever we're doing. And he would be like, I can't rush these people. This is like, but TJ wasn't getting those long personal stories. But I thought it's important to listen to every single one for as long as it took.
Joel was the saint. Let's be clear. Joel, it was Saint Joel for the entire 90s. Saint Joel. That was his price for the dead uncles. And I mean, like, was, Joel could do no wrong. Joel was, let's give Joel the Anson Award 2 years after we, let's see, Joel, but,
when did you get it, TJ? 5 years after
I got it at the end. I got like the consolation, I guess we better acknowledge the other asshole in the program.
It was like 5 years later after I got mine.
But I think it's important. I think it's important to note that, like, those first 2-3 years, death was our companion on this journey. We just didn't know. We didn't know when Joel's time would come. We actually had to talk about death and talk about what will happen when you get sick, because Joel was up there every single night talking about being infected with HIV. I don't think that too many people had that. I mean, he had to relive that every single night, even when he wasn't in that mood. We might be in a really good mood all day, and then Joel has to get up there and talk about this like death sentence thing. And he and I had to joke about it in order to get through it. We used to at first start off very serious, like, "Oh, Joel, what do you want on your quilt someday?" And we talk about that stuff. And then by the end, it was like, "Here's the song I'm going to play at your funeral." I can see clearly now the rain is gone.
Golden's gone.
And I made a whole mix of songs I was going to play at his funeral, and they were all inappropriate, and so, but we had to navigate the emotions every single day. And what people don't understand about speakers is sometimes you have to get there and do the program, and you are not in the right mood to do that. There were days where I was like very sad, whatever was going on in my life, and I had to get up there and be funny about condoms. And there'd be times where Joel was feeling really great, and then he had to get up there and talk about becoming infected. And so that's part of the speaker thing sometimes too, especially for people who talk about serious topics like sexual violence and different things, depression. This, Scott. Depression, different things. Sometimes the mood of the program doesn't match where you are that week.
Where you are.
And so that was definitely a challenge of this, but because we were doing it so much, I think we got really good at it. So
Mac and I kind of talked about this when we did opening keynote for FEA Fraternity Executives Association's annual meeting, and I kind of talked about what do you do to get your mind right before you go up. And we talked about, we both say a little prayer before we head up. And my prayer is always just let me be what they need me to be today. And sometimes some days you only have 70%, but you're just praying that, gosh, just at least let me be able to give the 100% of my 70%. And oftentimes if you show up authentically and your story is a compelling one, 70% is enough, and can be a wildly impactful. Joel, you just brought up just a great point. I can only imagine how overwhelming that had to be, especially early on when I first started doing mental health speaking, and I would tell our family story. It was amazing how many people would come up, even if we were at a farmer's market, just passing out stress balls and flyers. And I was talking to our therapist, and I said, I had no idea how many people would come and share their stories. And she goes, yeah, I probably should have warned you about that. 'Cause once you become a safe place, that's really what you're trying to
Yeah.
help people understand they're safe and that they're cared for and they're not alone. And so I can imagine how overwhelming that had to have been, especially when you're going through it yourself. So for champing that out and
Yeah.
being what those people needed you to be in those moments, gosh, thank you for doing that.
I think it helped me immensely deal with the fact that this is what I had. I mean, that this was my trajectory, and I always felt like at least I'm going to say my infection meant something at the end of my days, or someone will say at my funeral, whatever happened.
Yeah.
I just knew that by doing that, it was giving me, and it was giving TJ as my friend. I don't want to speak for you, but it gave you also to feel like you did something to support me, right? I mean, want to jump in there?
I think, and Joel's motivations were very much about making his life matter and all these sort of things. I think at a certain point, it became like, I became very aware of the educational momentum we were creating. I was in the Joel and TJ story. I was the business person. I was the one who was doing the marketing. I was building, I didn't even understand it at the time, but I was building the foundations for what would be the company I would start later. And, so I was being propelled by the numbers in the audiences and the amount of press coverage we got. And like, I was going for amount of impact.
Yeah.
And I think, and, Joel was going for relevance and meaning and courage to keep dealing with whatever the new drug was. And here's another thing. Those drugs in the early days were messing with his system. I mean, my God, the amount of time we had to spend in bathrooms and different things just because Joel was fighting AZT, wreaking havoc on his stomach. And he was living that medical reality. I was just trying to propel this damn thing to see how long it would go and what we could do with it. So, again, it was one of those things where lightning in a bottle, man. We just were the right two people, I think, and we did love each other so much just as friends and business partners and all that sort of thing. And, every day we knew we were making a difference, even on the hard days. And there were plenty of hard days.
You've been listening to Leaders, Letters, and Legacy. The show is produced by Scott Fussell and hosted by Dr. Marianne Calais and Scott Fussell. Background noise is provided by Bailey, Bentley, and Lincoln. Spousal support provided by Sue and Reed. For more, be sure to follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And to help others find the show, be sure to rate and review the podcast before logging out. Leaders, Letters, and Legacy is an L3 Learning production.